Winter of 1910 settled over London like a damp grey blanket, and in the rows of identical terraced houses on Hilldrop Crescent, life was a private affair conducted behind heavy curtains. Number 39 was home to an unassuming American couple, Dr. Hawley Harvey Crippen and his wife Cora. To the neighbors, their marriage was a familiar puzzle of mismatched pieces. He was a man who seemed to apologize for the space he occupied. Short, bespectacled, and perpetually mild-mannered. He made a modest living not as a proper surgeon, but as a distributor of dubious patent medicines and a consultant for a deafness charity, a profession that suited his quiet, unthreatening nature. Cora, however, was his opposite in every way. Where he faded into the background, she demanded the spotlight. A woman of considerable appetite and ambition, she had reinvented herself as Belle Elmore, a music hall singer of grand, if not quite realized, talent. Their home was a stage for her performances, filled with the gaudy costumes and boisterous friends from her theatrical world. She adored the glamour, the gossip, and the attention, and she made no secret of her dissatisfaction with her meek, unimpressive husband, whom she often belittled in front of guests. Dr. Crippen absorbed it, all with a patient, almost pathetic smile. Quite abruptly, the noise stopped. In late January, the vibrant, troublesome Cora simply vanished from Hilldrop Crescent. When her concerned friends from the Music Hall Ladies Guild came calling, Dr. Crippen received them with a calm and tragic demeanor. He explained that Cora had been called away suddenly to America due to a grave family illness. A few weeks later, he shared the devastating update that she had succumbed to a sudden and violent bout of pneumonia there. He played the role of the grieving widower perfectly, his small stature and quiet sorrow earning him genuine sympathy. The story was sad, but it was neat. It provided a necessary tragic closure. But in the weeks that followed, small, discordant notes began to sound. The doctor's grief seemed to move with unusual speed. He was seen attending music hall functions with a cheerful demeanor, always accompanied by his young, timid secretary, Ethel Leneve. More strikingly, Cora's extensive and beloved wardrobe, the furs, the feathered hats, the elegant dresses that were her pride and joy, began to reappear on the person of the formerly plain Ethel. A friend spotted a distinctively jeweled piece, once worn by Cora, now fastened around Ethel's neck. When questioned, the doctor offered vague explanations about honoring his late wife's memory by putting her things to good use. But a cold, unsettling feeling began to creep through the circle of Cora's friends. The silence from number 39 was no longer just the quiet of a widower's home. It had become the deep, unsettling quiet of a missing person, a story that, upon closer inspection, had too many holes to hold. Unsettling quiet surrounding Cora's disappearance began to curdle into outright suspicion amongst her closest friends. The cheerful reappearance of her finery on Ethel Leneve, a woman who had previously dressed with severe modesty, felt like a grotesque violation. The whispers grew louder, moving from the green rooms of music halls to more determined conversations. The man who finally decided to act was John Nash, a former music hall manager and a fellow American who had considered Cora a genuine friend. He found the doctor's entire story, the sudden departure, the swift death, the rapid redistribution of her property, completely unbelievable. Cora was a woman of immense drama. She would never have exited the stage of her own life so quietly. Driven by a sense of loyalty and growing dread, Nash marched to Scotland Yard. Initial response was as Crippen might have hoped, polite skepticism. Without a body or any evidence of a crime, the police were dealing with little more than the gossip of theatrical types. Yet, the persistence of Nash and the peculiar details of the case prompted Chief Inspector Walter Dew to pay a visit to Hilldrop Crescent. Dr. Crippen received the officer with the same calm composure he had shown everyone else. He patiently reiterated the story of Cora's illness and death in America, his manner so utterly convincing that Dew later admitted he was almost entirely satisfied. As a mere formality, and with Crippen's cheerful permission, Dew and his men conducted a cursory search of the house. They found nothing out of the ordinary. The home was tidy, orderly, and showed no signs of a struggle. They apologized for the intrusion and prepared to leave. It was a fleeting moment, a nearly imperceptible crack in the doctor's facade that changed everything. As the officers were departing, Inspector Dew glanced back. He saw Crippen standing in the doorway, and for a split second, the mask of the helpful, grieving husband slipped. Dew saw not calmness, but a profound, chilling anxiety. It was a look that didn't fit the narrative. That single, unguarded moment convinced Dew to return the next day for a more thorough examination. That night, however, the doctor's nerve broke. The prospect of a second, more invasive search was too much to bear. He and Ethel Leneve packed a few belongings in a frantic rush. In a desperate bid to escape, he cut Ethel's hair and dressed her in a boy's sailor suit, a clumsy disguise for their flight to the continent and onwards to Canada. Back at Hilldrop Crescent the next morning, Dew and his team found the house empty. The bird had flown, and his flight was a confession in itself. The search now became a frantic hunt for evidence. They tore the place apart, lifting floorboards and ripping up floor coverings. In the dark, grimy cellar beneath the brick floor, their shovels struck something wrong. The earth had been recently disturbed. They dug carefully, their movements hurried and tense. What they unearthed would become the stuff of national horror. A headless, limbless torso, wrapped in a man's pajama jacket, buried in quicklime. It was a ghastly, anonymous thing. The hunt was no longer for a missing woman, it was for a murderer, and he was on a ship heading across the Atlantic. Flight of Dr. Crippen and Ethel Leneve was a journey shrouded in a bizarre and claustrophobic normalcy. Aboard the SS Montrose, they registered as Mr. John Robinson and his 16-year-old son, Master John. To their fellow passengers, they were an unremarkable pair, a quiet, kindly father and his shy, sickly son who kept mostly to their cabin. Crippen played his part with meticulous care, his gentle, polite manner disarming any potential curiosity. He was a man who seemed devoted to his frail child, often seen patting the boy's hand reassuringly. Yet, beneath the surface, a constant, humming tension existed. Ethel, sweltering in her woolen boy's suit, lived in a state of terrified paralysis. The disguise was profoundly uncomfortable, both physically and emotionally. Every glance from a stranger felt like an accusation, every casual question a potential trap. She was a woman playing a role she scarcely understood, her only anchor the quiet, desperate man beside her. Their attempt at invisibility was their greatest mistake. The ship's captain, Henry Kendall, was an observant man who read the British newspapers. The widespread reports of the gruesome discovery at Hilldrop Crescent and the descriptions of the missing fugitives had captured the public's imagination. As he watched the odd couple, little details began to nag at him. The boy's walk was too graceful, his hands too delicate. The way he struggled with the simple tasks of tying a necktie or throwing a rope seemed strangely unmasculine. Captain Kendall's suspicion turned to certainty when he saw the pair on deck one day. A sudden gust of wind blew against the boy's baggy trousers, revealing the unmistakable curve of a woman's hip. He knew instantly who his passengers were. In a moment of brilliant modernity, he did not confront them. Instead, he retreated to his cabin and composed a wireless telegram to Scotland Yard, a message that would change the course of criminal history. Have strong suspicions that Crippen London cellar murderer and accomplice are among saloon passengers. While the Montrose chugged steadily across the ocean, a faster ship, the Laurentic, was chartered. On board was Inspector Walter Dew, racing to intercept them. The world followed the chase through daily newspaper updates, a transatlantic drama played out in Morse code and headlines. The passengers on the Montrose remained blissfully unaware, dining alongside the wanted pair, while Captain Kendall watched, waiting. As the ship finally approached the Canadian coast, Crippen and Ethel, believing they had escaped, allowed themselves a moment of hope. They stood at the railing, watching the land draw near, perhaps imagining a new life. But as the ship docked, at Father Point, Quebec, they saw a figure waiting on the quayside. A calm, familiar man in a bowler hat. Inspector Dew stepped forward and simply said, "Good morning, Dr. Crippen." The doctor, defeated and strangely relieved, offered no resistance. He merely replied, "I am not sorry. The anxiety has been too much. Ethel, her disguise finally useless, was arrested separately, her face a pale mask of sheer terror, a pawn in a game whose rules she never fully understood. Trial of Hawley Harvey Crippen at the Old Bailey was the greatest spectacle of the Edwardian era, a public feeding frenzy disguised as a judicial process. The prosecution presented a narrative that was simple, monstrous, and utterly compelling. The meek henpecked husband had finally snapped, poisoning his flamboyant wife, dismembering her body, and burying the remains to run away with his lover. The evidence seemed overwhelming. His flight was an admission of guilt. The pajama jacket wrapped around the torso was identified as a type sold to him. Most damning of all was the testimony of Cora's friends, who swore the piece of skin from the torso bore a scar identical to one Cora had on her abdomen from a long-ago operation. The public and the press were convinced. They saw a cold-blooded monster who had violated the most sacred trust. But the defense, led by the brilliant Alfred Tobin, mounted a fierce and surprising challenge. He attacked the very foundation of the case, the identity of the body. It was a headless, limbless torso, he argued. There was no face, no fingerprints, no definitive way to prove it was Cora Crippen. The scar evidence was subjective based on the memories of friends who had not seen Cora's bare abdomen in years. He painted Cora as a volatile woman who might have simply run away from her dull life, leaving her clothes behind. For a breathtaking moment, the case teetered. The chain of circumstantial evidence strained. If the body wasn't Cora's, then there was no murder, and the doctor's flight, while suspicious, was not proof of homicide. It was then that the prosecution unveiled a new, terrifying kind of evidence that belonged to the future. Forensic science. Bernard Spilsbury, a young and brilliant pathologist, took the stand. He testified that a toxicological analysis of the organs had revealed a lethal quantity of hyoscine hydrobromide, a powerful sedative. This was not a substance found in a common household. Then a clerk from a chemical supplier took the stand and produced a damning invoice. Just before Cora's disappearance, Dr. Crippen had purchased 5 grains of hyoscine hydrobromide, a massive, inexplicable amount for a minor patent medicine vendor. The science was cold, precise, and inescapable. The jury no longer had to rely on memories of a scar or interpretations of behavior. They had a scientific fact. The body in the cellar was poisoned, and the man on trial had bought the poison. The combination of old-fashioned morality and cutting-edge science sealed his fate. The jury took just 27 minutes to find him guilty. He was sentenced to death. Ethel Leneve, tried separately as an accessory after the fact, was acquitted, the public's fury having been spent on the doctor himself. For a century, the story was a closed book, a classic tale of a murderous husband meeting his just end. Dr. Crippen was the archetypal meek monster, and his execution was a satisfying conclusion to a sordid affair. The evidence, particularly the damning toxicology report, seemed irrefutable. History had rendered its verdict. But then, a ghost from the past was summoned by a tool the Edwardian court could never have imagined: DNA analysis. In 2007, a team of scientists conducted tests on the tissue samples from the remains found at Hilldrop Crescent, preserved for decades on microscope slides. The goal was to finally put to rest any lingering doubts. The results, however, did the opposite. The mitochondrial DNA extracted from the sample did not match that of any living relatives of Cora Crippen. The body under the coal cellar was not hers. This revelation exploded the foundation of the case. If it wasn't Cora, then who was it? And if Crippen didn't kill his wife, why did he run? And why did he seemingly confess on the gallows? The documentary weaves a new, haunting theory from the threads of Crippen's past and the social realities of the time. Cora Crippen had a well-documented history of gynecological troubles, including miscarriages and likely several illegal abortions. Procedures a man like Crippen, with his dubious medical credentials, might have been called upon to perform. The OI new theory suggests a catastrophic accident may have occurred at 39 Hilldrop Crescent. A patient, perhaps a young woman from the music hall world, died during a botched operation. Panicked and knowing his reputation and liberty were forfeit if discovered, Crippen did the unthinkable. He dissected the body to dispose of it, purchasing the hyoscine not as a murder weapon, but perhaps as a sedative for the procedure that went horribly wrong. His flight was not from a murder charge, but from a scandal that would have destroyed him. His final words about the anxiety ending make a new, tragic sense. Ethel, utterly in the dark, simply followed the man she loved. The real Cora Crippen? She may have seized the opportunity to vanish from a life and a husband she despised, her disappearance masked by the chaos of the murder investigation and the execution of the very man she left behind. The most famous murder in British legal history may not have been a murder of a wife at all, but a tragic cover-up of a different crime, and a guilty man was hanged for a killing he perhaps did not commit.